Hi there and welcome back to Japan, where I'm going to be doing an album review of a bit of an old one here. And this is Love Jam by OTSUKA, and if you've already clicked on this, you've already seen what the album cover looks like, and you'll know therefore this is a bit of an interesting place to start. Now this is actually quite an old album coming out in 2004, but as we've started doing these album reviews on the channel, and hopefully we'll be able to do quite a few of these, there's a lot of contemporary, modern, new albums that I really want to cover, but there's also some old ones that I might as well go back and explore, because the whole thing about this channel, as well as bringing you the latest stuff, it's about giving you guys a chance to listen to some music that maybe you haven't heard before. And recently we covered Best Scandal by Scandal, their first album, which was only a few years newer than this. And it made me think, you know, there are some older albums that maybe a lot of you guys haven't heard. I mean, I've heard about there's so many people who follow this channel who only got into Japanese music sort of in the last 10 years, maybe even less. So every now and then, not too frequently, but every now and then I'll go back and I'll talk about an older album that I think is either relevant to people's interests or just one that I've got a lot to say about. And this is one that I have got a lot to say about. Now, I'll start off by quickly explaining what my story with this album is. And my story with this album is that this came out in 2004 when I was 19 years old. And it was one of the first Japanese albums that I really got into. Now, as a lot of you know, if you've sort of know my story from various discussions, maybe on the Discord of a live chat, I was one of those people, I grew up, you know, around that sort of 90s Japanese wave where everyone was into like everything like Pokemon and anime, and James was one of those people, co-presenter for the channel, James, in case you don't know. He was really into all that stuff growing up. I was one of those people who I saw so much of that around me, it kind of put me off of it, and I was never kind of into those things. So it was only sort of slowly with time and with travelling. I started travelling very young in my teenage years, luckily, because my family never travelled when I was a kid. So the minute I could travel, I did. And, you know, I was obviously into music from a very young age as well, started working in it in my teenage years as well. And also when I was in America, when I was about 17 years old, when I went to America as well, just like became exposed to a few more things, and I got into a little bit of Japanese music, started getting into it, but this was one of the first albums that I heard age 19 that had a real definite impact on winning me over. And not only that, but it also won me over a lot to OTSUKA as an artist, which is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. Now, as you can probably tell, this is one of those albums that has a very sort of legendary cover. I didn't actually see the cover at first. I first got into OTSUKA just from hearing some of her stuff online. And then I was on CD Japan, actually, that website's been around for a while, when they announced the lead single from this album, which was called Happy Days, not the theme tune from the TV series, was about to come out. And so I thought, oh, okay, this looks interesting. I liked a bit of what I heard. I was like, I'll buy that. At the time, I was just buying CDs to see if there was anything I really liked. I got it. It was really surprising, as I'll explain why when I go into the track-by-track description of how this album flows in a minute. But it really won me over. And then when the album came out, I saw the cover and I went, all right. And the first thing I noticed, like with so many CDs of the time, but especially in Japan, you have the normal edition and you have the special edition. The normal edition, her mouth is closed. The special edition, her mouth is open. Cheeky. Now, I bought that. I loved it. The album really blew me away because, as with my favourite artists, especially growing up, my favourite artist one was where you bought the album and everything was different. You know, it gave you a range of different sounds for different moods. And this is definitely what this album does. Now, that partly comes down to the fact that OTSUKA as an artist is, well, she's obviously a singer, but she's a multi-talented musician, you know, piano, guitar. She plays a lot of her own music, very hands-on with doing, you know, I've seen her live now a couple of times and she plays different instruments when she's playing live as well. Even started learning violin in recent years. But she's also, you know, she writes her own material in a lot of detail. She's a really very varied and mature writer, which another thing that really sold me on what she did. I'm not one of those people who believes, oh, you have to play your own instruments or you have to write your own songs to be worthwhile. A lot of the artists I like kind of, you know, either they're artists like Bish, who as a general, most of them don't play their own instruments and they don't write their songs as well, or stuff like Silent Siren, who don't really write most of their songs. For me, it doesn't ruin it, but it does often mean that you can be assured of a certain level of quality and consistency if an artist is very hands-on in what they do. Now, And that was something that really sold me as I started to find out more about what she did. But this was my first real taste of her music. Now, like I say, she's multi-talented. She had a lot of criticism, one of the main things being that her voice was relatively... a lot of people thought sort of high-pitched and thin. She was kind of drafted in by Avex because they'd had Ayumi Hamasaki just blowing away charts for ages. But as her career started to go on and she was getting comparatively old, they needed to find some talent to take the mantle. And that's kind of where OTSUKA came in. Now, that's one of the reasons why there was that kind of criticism, is comparatively her voice wasn't as powerful. At the same time as what Avex had signed the slightly more famous Kodakumi, who was just kind of like just did knockoff Western pop and R&B style music. Before that had been a big thing in Asia, she was a big part of that. And so, you know, and she was also, Kodakumi, in case you don't know, is known for her objectionable opinions on many things, which got her... She was put on hiatus for something she said about women's reproductive organs. So, you know, not exactly the nicest person. But then you've got OTSUKA, who, like I say, Osaka girl with a big funny personality, likes to do comical songs, very multi-talented, but not to everyone's liking. And one of the main reasons that came along with that is that on the album before this was her second commercial album. On the first album, she had her most memorable song, which had stayed in the charts for ages, a song called Sakurambo, which is actually a very, very good chorus, a really good song in many ways. It's about as good as you could expect from a pop rock song to be. Brilliant, but it did kind of get so famous that she was left with this label of being that girl who does the catchy and slightly irritating to some song. And that, even today, you say to most people that, oh, it's great, even though she's had a plethora of singles now and quite a lot of success, that one song was so big and so impactful that it's kind of defined her entire career. So anyway, this album comes along, Love Jam. There's loads of funny sort of legends and stories about this. I believe there was one thing where there was I've seen the photographs, there was big billboard posters by like motorways, freeways, whatever you call them, for this album, and apparently it had been accused of distracting drivers and had been blamed for a couple of incidents, which means that I believe that the advert was taken down in certain places. I also heard stories that apparently people inside Avex, no one would admit what the actual cover was referencing. Everyone kind of quietly, it's the sort of old-fashioned Japanese business thing that you don't want to be the first person to say, hey, is this album cover Bukaki? Bukaki? Anyone? No one wants to be the first person to say it, so apparently it was another thing that no one actually ever discussed what the album cover was. There was a lot of really interesting legends to this, but I went into it, and, oh, by the way, in case you're not aware, the formula for these album reviews now, I change glasses between different sections, and I'm about to talk about track by track, so I need my track by track glasses. But I wasn't really aware of any of this. This was me as someone who was being big into music, but was just starting to get into Japanese music. I was like, what is this kind of interesting album going to be? Dived in, and like I say, after only having heard the one single, I was kind of blown away. Now, the first single I'd heard was a song called, like I say, Happy Days, which was a really high energy rock song. So coming into the first song, track by track glasses. So coming into the first song of the album, the first song is a song called Superman. Written in katakana, but it does phonetically read as Superman, I'm going to read through my notes now. As always, I take lots of notes. Even though I've been living with this album for years and listened to it many times, I still went through and made some notes so I could articulate some interesting points to you who've either heard the album or haven't. Now, this really sort of comes in as a song which is very much of the time. And you've got to remember, 2004, in the West, you had things like Blink-182, Sum 41 was still kind of like the height of their powers. And in Japan, even, you know, bands like Puffy, who were a big deal at the time before a lot of the sort of rock bands we know now, the female rock bands of like Scandal, still were a few years away from being formed. You know, no Band-Maid, Silent Sirens, anything like that. Puffy were the big deal, and they'd really started to creep into doing sort of pop rock sounds as well. Their sound was becoming kind of in that Blink-182, Sum 41, Avril Lavigne area, but obviously with their own Japanese take on it. So at the time, that sound was it. That sort of pop punk, but with a clean production sound. Often you hear, and it's most evident, I think, Sum 41 were the most evident example of this, where the overall sound is quite lively. It doesn't sound too squashed, but each individual instrument is very compressed. So, for example, the guitar, it sounds really energetic, but it's smooth. It's always kind of the same loudness. It's got that crunch, but it's very smooth. The drums, impactful, but with always the exact same amount of punch. The volume doesn't go up and down much. So overall, the song's not particularly compressed, but the individual aspects are particularly compressed. As always, if you're not familiar with how compression works in music, do check out, we have a video about that on this channel. It's a little bit old now, but you can search it and find it just in case you want to understand the concept of compression better. But anyway, this was the style, and this song very much sounds of it. Comes in, it's got that sort of pop rock, pop punk vibe. It's got the Japanese style melody. OTSUKA, very much a melody writer. Although she's good at doing different genres, she always leans back to doing songs that are very melodic, which is one of the reasons why Sakurambo, the song I mentioned before, was such a big single. She just nailed a fantastic melody, which made one of the most memorable choruses in Japanese music history. So, she comes in with a song here, which is, in many ways, you could say it's not a blow-away first song. It's just a good, energetic first song to start off an album. Doesn't make you think this is going to be amazing. And having heard Happy Days, which, like I say, is a rock song anyway, I was like, okay, this is going to be a rock album. This is going to be like a pop rock album. It's going to be of that sort of Sum 41, Blink-182 pop punk sort of vibe. The song, though, straight from the get-go, like I say, it's got this sort of catchy sound to it. And, it is especially melodic. It does feel like a lot of those songs, like it's a pop song being played through a rock sound. But one of the things which is interesting is it does have this juxtaposition, which you start to get a feeling for what OTSUKA does, which is that it sounds a bit cheeky. She sounds like she's having a bit of fun, like she's singing and enjoying it. She's not just rocking out. She's got the energy in her voice, but she's kind of almost, you can hear almost a sort of a bit of a laughter to her voice. And this is matched by the fact that there is this slightly twee and tacky use of a spoken bit in the bridge, which is like a sound clip of like a police announcement. Talking to it, like I said, the song's called Superman, and conceptually it's like a policeman shouting from his car at Superman for flying too slowly in traffic and causing a traffic jam. This is the kind of twee weirdness that you kind of expect from the album. It's weird, but it's sense that she's just having fun. She's just having a laugh with this. And that moves into track number 2, Happy Days. Now, the reason why I didn't say too much about the song first was because I wanted to sort of explain how this works in the context of the album. And it starts like I say, it's got that sort of clean production of the time, but it doesn't change the fact that it's actually a very heavy song. It starts with like a rumbling bass. You've got these really slamming guitars. The vocals are distorted pretty much all the way through. It's got a distorted vocal from a lead single from a pop artist. And on top of that, it's got punk speed, like quad speed drums in the chorus. Like, jugga, 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 jugga. This is a real headbanging song for all the nice clean production. It's basically a headbanger of a track with a shouted chorus line and everything that you would associate with just being a really heavy song. The song is still called Happy Days, though, and it's delivered again with a sort of vocal glee, a joy in the whole delivery. It sounds like a really happy song. And it's that ability that she's able to do something which makes you want to headbang but also kind of keeps you smiling. This, to me, kind of reminds me, it's very different. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's very different from the modern sort of likes of things like Bandmade and Scandal, but I do feel that there's an element of the similar joy to it that you can get from those bands when they're at their most happy and rocky to this. It is just, I mean, like I say, it's a really interesting juxtaposition of tone that is so rock and at the same time so cleanly delivered and so joyful. And interesting, I said that she usually writes very melodically. This has a sort of call and answer style shouted chorus, which is really kind of interesting, but she does it, she uses it in the right way, and that this one instance is like irritatingly catchy. So yeah, very effective. So clearly she's gone for this option when it was necessary, and it works brilliantly here. Now let's move on. That's a really interesting start, but the album then goes for a lot of variation, because this is when you start to realise that this is actually more than just a rock album. And this is when, as a first-time listener, I started really getting a vibe of that. Actually, this album's going to be, like I say, something kind of more engagingly varied. The next track, Strawberry Jam, It's a simple melodic song. In the context of the album, it's probably arguably a little bit forgettable, but in its position in the album, for a listen through, it actually makes a nice little variation in tone, in that suddenly it goes for a slightly more jazzy rhythm. You've got like some great sort of backing brass instruments in the background, and again, focusing very heavily again on melody. So this is starting to, again, you can really sort of move to this, but it's starting to lower the heat a little bit, take things into a slightly more relaxed and you can almost say classy direction. And then the next track, Daisuki Dayo, it just goes full on ballad. So suddenly, the rhythm's been sort of going from this headbanging thing to something a little bit more swingy, and now we're into a full, gentle ballad. It's like really delicate. You've got sort of swooning, sentimental love song vibes, strings in the background. Really, again, her quality of writing a catchy big chorus really comes out here. I mean, she's one of those artists where most of her songs on, certainly on her formative albums, almost all of them could arguably have come out as singles in some ways. They're just all so catchy. But this one, really big, catchy. It's a very simple song, actually, in a lot of ways. This isn't one of her more complex moments, but it is one of those examples of simple and effective. And it's just the fact that in like 3 songs, we've gone from like headbanging punk and like shredding guitars down to a gentle ballad, and it feels right. It flows well, it feels right. I know she is one of those artists who does write an album as an album. She is an album writer. Certainly for all of the albums I've seen her talk about. The next one, I don't know the name of. It's like Kanji Ko or something like that. Anyway, this is where, again, we get a different change. So we're still in that lighter realm here, but this is quite it's quite an emotionally tense sounding song. It sounds quite tense and brooding. It reminds me, although it's very different as a piece of music, it reminds me a lot of Eleanor Rigby, in the same way Eleanor Rigby has that little rhythm. This has something similar being played on guitar, very sharp staccato guitar being played. And then around that, you've got like a double bass sound, you've got strings and everything building. It sounds kind of emotionally unsettled. It's a very rewarding sound. It's not kind of like excessively tense, but it does sound emotionally mature. It sounds like something where there's little, again, it's the juxtapositions of sounds. It's the little bits which sound kind of emotionally happy and the little bits that sound tense, like the guitar, which is not overdone. Again, it never dives in to try to punch you in the face too much with melodrama. It just sort of is a very well-balanced song. Maybe it's for a lot of people doesn't stand out, but again, works very well in the context of the album. Now, this is where we go into you suddenly get a feeling, okay, we get an idea. She's very a complex writer. She knows how to use instruments. Then we go in a totally insane direction with the next song, which is called Mosochop. I always have trouble pronouncing it because it's like a weird use of, it's the Japanese use of vowels when you have like double vowels. Mosochop, I think is how you pronounce it. But anyway, this suddenly, just out of nowhere, we go heavy production. You've got like a heavy electronic beat comes in the background. It's still very melody focused, I must admit. That's one of the sort of constants that remains throughout the album. It's melody focused, it's quite catchy, but the melodies do change a lot. And to be honest, this one just sounds like she had so much fun making it. There's an air of professionalism. It's professionally enough produced that it doesn't just sound like first time messing around with everything, and yet it's so free in the way that it samples like random sounds and then resamples other sounds and uses electric beats, and there's constant vocal effects on her all the way through the song. Her voice is going through effects and they're really over the top, but they're kind of appropriate and they're very playful. It does sound like she is discovering all these toys for the first time, and yet at the same time is musically mature enough to know how to put them together in a way that is going to, it's going to work. I know that she did have help with, she had the same arranger work with her for many albums, and she had a good producer on the first couple of albums as well, but they were relatively soft touch actually. A lot of the creative control came from the way that she wrote the songs as arrangements. So it is interesting hearing, how her sound has been sort of nicely positioned enough that it doesn't get out of control at any point, but there's this freedom. And Monster Chop is a great example of that. I mean, some of the stuff this song does, you just go, okay, I'm not used to hearing people do that crazy stuff. It's kind of in that Poly-6 territory of just what is going on here. And also in the Poly-6 territory of being, you know what, this works. So, without further ado from that, though, we're now sort of over halfway through the album, and if you think it's slowing down, it's not. The next track, just called Pom 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 Pom, not as in the Kyari Kyari Pom Pom song. it just suddenly turns into punk. We go from all those electric sounds into suddenly, here is a raw punk rock sound. Again, kind of fused with joy. There's no dark rock songs in this. Most of her darker songs, she tends not to use guitar. There's a couple of examples from the album after this where she does, but usually for the darker moments, she uses much more sort of complex and atmospheric sounds. Usually she uses guitar for more sort of raging, energetic, joyful songs. Pom Pom is just a song, though, where we go back to that earlier sound, but it's much more raw and punky. It manages to sound different from the earlier tracks, therefore, in being that little bit more raw and that little bit more basic and stripped down. And it's got a gimmick of just being sort of, the word pon being repeated to obvious comical ad absurdum. She's again, she could just hear the joy, and she's deliberately throwing her voice and just sort of doing crazy little vocal things halfway through where, you can just hear there's like a personality being expressed through her voice. She's almost acting the Mad Hatter as she does it. And it is both annoying and effectively catchy, hearing the word pon repeated that many times on I can't say it because if I do it I'll probably get struck just for copying it, but it is really addictive, the little vocal melody she does those pons in. So like I said, it sounds like she's having like so much fun, and to the point where she's like the vocal builds up to almost a scream. In fact, there's one bit in the bridge where it has this breakdown where it goes to like a chill out electronic bit just for a few bars, just to sort of completely change the tone, and then it bursts back into the last chorus with a full-blown blood-curdling scream of pon 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 pon. It's so bizarre. And again, it's so freeing. It's so freeing the way that it is both really competently constructed, really maturely constructed, but it sounds like in concept like something you would expect from someone who just learnt how to do music and just wanted to have fun and didn't really care about producing a mature second album to follow up their previous commercial success. It's just brilliant the way that it manages to capture that fun and that professionalism together, and this is probably the highlight of the insanity of the album. Anyway, track 8 again is amazing. I don't know song names when I've been familiar with an album for like best part of 2 decades, and I don't actually know the song names to all the songs. It's Futatsu something, so 2 of something. This is actually a slightly strange part, and that here there is a slightly jarring change of tone. I think that we've gone through quite a lot of changes of tone, but this is the first one that feels a little bit jarring, and it sort of breaks down to like a nice little waltz. And it's good. I would argue this song is probably one of the slightly more disposable songs on the album, in that it doesn't really feel like it stands out in any particular way, but it's nice as a bit of a variation. I mean, what's really noticeable is it's oozing with like nice little touches. The musicianship here is really nicely delivered. The song's kind of simple, doesn't really, like I said, the song doesn't scream anything huge, but it's got a good melody. It's got nice creative development in the arrangement as it goes on. You think that, it's kind of like that simple premise. It feels like something, because OTSUKA, her main go-to instrument is piano. Something that she's lent on more and more as career goes on, just sort of nice playing piano solos and things. But this one is one of the prime examples in this album where you feel like she just sat down on one ladies' evening and just played the piano and just played out a little melody, sung something to herself, and went, I'll do a song with that, and then just kind of wrote an arrangement around it. It feels like a simple piano ditty that kind of got built into something more. It's harmless, it's nice, it's a good melody, makes a good listen, but it's not particularly stand out, and I think the fact that it's such a jarring change from the song prior doesn't really help. So in the long run, it's one of the ones that you tend to find yourself more willing to skip, and I don't think that's, like I said, I don't think it's because it's a bad song, I just think it's kind of not in the right place here. But it mainly seems to be padding out the gap between Pon Pon and the song that comes next, Kinyo Hanabi. Now, Kinyo Hanabi is one of her more famous singles as well. Like I said, she's got a lot of famous singles, although they all kind of get trumped by Sakura and Bo. But it is one of her more famous singles, and it is a big, sort of very atmospheric, dramatic. I was used I think it's been used in a few soundtracks, and I'm not surprised. It's a very sort of cinematic sounding ballad. Beautiful, big. The video as well really backs that up. It's like I say, it's quite famous. I mean, it's just the way it suddenly, you suddenly go back into this emotional space in the album, this emotional maturity just suddenly comes back in. I mean, it's a beautifully crafted mix of sounds. You've got piano, you've got that sort of chromatic percussion, sort of like a xylophone sort of sound. It's not a xylophone, but similar thing, that sort of little bell sounds, very sharp, little beautiful sounds. And, it builds up from that. One thing that really made me think, looking back at it now, really thinking about it, I mean, although it's kind of got like a soft, chilled out electro beat, it's a very subtle beat. It's not what you usually think of when you think of electronic beats. It's a very chill out beat underneath it. Because of all those delicate sounds and because of the drama, it really actually sounds like something you would expect from a Wagaki band. This really sounds like a Wagaki band song in many ways, although it doesn't have the shamisen, the koto, and so much reliance on the traditional Japanese instruments, which admittedly I love so much. It feels very much tonally like if you just gave this to a Wagaki band and said, play it with your instrument, it would be brilliantly suited to them. It has that atmosphere, but it's so well written that this is not her normal thing. She hardly has a normal thing, but she pulls off a song that, like I say, became really popular and was just so effective at doing what it did. Now, one of the interesting things about this is it builds up in layers, a tactic that I like this in music writing, when the song starts out gentle and just builds up, and the layers start coming in more. But then it has this nice little change towards the end where it goes completely where you don't expect, and the beat suddenly goes quad time, and the beat goes really, really fast. But it's to build up a sort of emotional sense. The beat doesn't get louder. It's not like the song suddenly turned heavy. The beat just gets faster. And the song seems to be speeding away, but the tone doesn't change. And that beautiful choice to just do that simple change really adds this sudden climactic end so that it bursts out on a really beautiful final note. This is a really maturely written song that, like I say, just sounds so far beyond her years, and like something that now I come to think that I would love to hear a Wagaki band play a cover of this. I really would. And I would love to know if you guys haven't heard it before, even if you have, what do you think? I think this sounds like a song that Wagaki band really should... they're not averse to doing covers. They should do this. Anyway, so moving on, we got like a couple more tracks. It's only 11-track album. Now, the penultimate track has got... I can't even remember how to say this in Japanese, but basically the title is something about pork tongue. You can buy pork tongue meat to eat in Japanese restaurants. Pork tongue costing 735 yen. That's what the title is, basically. Translated. Certain type of, I think it's pork tongue and some sauce costs 735 yen. That's the title. This song is one certainly when I first heard it, I kind of skipped over it. And it didn't really, I just thought, it's a nice little one. This is one that if you understand Japanese, or as I started to understand Japanese, as I went back, and certainly as I heard, there's a second version, which I'll mention in a minute, you realise this is actually, it's melodically beautiful and simple. It's got extremely cheeky lyrics. There's a lot of double meaning going on here. This is the song that probably most plays in tone with the album cover. And so it's a gentle song, extremely catchy actually, but just sort of nice gentle melody, but with a really, really catchy chorus that gets stuck in your head. It's one that, it's one of those ones where you just, every now and then you'll just hear it in your brain, like years later, like, oh, here it is again. And, it's in a 3/4, 1 2 3, 1 2 3, 1 2 3 rhythm. A common rhythm, but strangely very underused in contemporary music, even in Japan. It's got that rhythm. And, it sounds so simple and catchy and just nice, but then you realise this is a cheeky song. This is actually quite cheeky, and when you hear the lyrics, I'll let people read it if they want to, but it adds a lot to it. And I think probably the best way, actually, even better than checking out the lyrics, is if you check out the music video to this, because I don't think this song would have been a single on its own, but they did a completely re-recorded version of this song. And the re-recorded version suddenly took it from this nice little gentle direction, kept the tempo, but now they did it as a full band one with guitars, made it quite heavy, made it kind of, gave it a bit of a swagger to it. And boy, did it work. It really worked, in fact. And they did a music video, which was equally, again, nothing in it dirty, but a lot of sort of winks and things like that. And it was really nicely done. It kept this sort of beautiful melodic quality. It kept that sort of Osaka girl cheekiness that she's so good at doing. It kept a very fun vibe to it. It stayed classy, and at the same time something where, to an unassuming ear, you just sort of listen to it as, nice little song. But to anyone with even a slight sense of double entendre, it's like, oh, all right. Yeah, it's a joy of personality in this song. And like I said, it is actually really catchy. I think that the original delivery was a little bit too twee to ever be really radio playable. But when they did that sort of swaggy, sort of full-on band version, it gave it a it gave it a little bit more, it lent into the personality more, and it kind of made it a good choice for single. I don't think it was a huge single for her. It wasn't that big, but I think it was a good choice to release it, and certainly a fun choice as well. So anyway, the last track is a strange one. It's a song called Friends, and it's a popular ending song. I mean, I've seen her perform this live a couple of times. This woman has an unbelievable number of live albums. Admittedly, she does songs that she completely rearranges them for her live shows a lot of the time, so it's not like she just regurgitates them. But she's done this song quite a few times, and usually does it in its original form. And I've got to admit, it does try to finish the album on a big dramatic ending note. It's basically a very good, but it's somewhat defeated by not really being able to do anything that we haven't heard in any of the earlier songs. It's not like it's the biggest sounding song. Kinyo Hanabi probably sounds much bigger than this. It's not like it's the most ballady song. Daisuki Dayo, certainly more. It's not even the most catchy song. I mean, the song just before this about pork tongue I would say is more catchy. There's a lot more catchy songs on here. It's kind of, the message is nice. It's a nice message to end the album on. It's got a sort of nice sort of message of peace and friendliness and everything. It's very much that classic approach to let's all sing our way out on a gentle final ballad with big strings and finish the album with a sort of very classic style conclusion. It's great on that front, but I do think that maybe just with the album having so many standout moments, it's a little bit of a safe ending, and I think that she probably did that. I think she probably was just happy to do a safe ending because there have been so many risks taken during the album, so many clever little experimentations. But to me, I don't know. I kind of was hoping for something a little bit of a last blowout of madness, but I can't really complain about just a classic ending. I must admit, it does feel like a little bit of a gentle, bit of a whimper of a way to finish. It doesn't feel like you kind of get to the last track, and when the last track almost feels like, I could skip this and go back to a previous song that I'd probably enjoy more. That's probably not a good thing. So yeah, I don't think the album ends on a particularly strong footing, but it's not a bad footing. It's just kind of, that's a nice little end. Yeah, kind of like that. So yeah, that's my track by track. Now it's time to change glasses to the extremely bright red ones, because it's time to give a bit of a conclusion on this. Oh, wow, every time I put these on, I see them in the camera, I was like, my God. So, anyway. Yeah, the first thing that really comes out of this album is not only the variation, because the variation's clearly there, but there are a lot of bands who like to be varied. What's really interesting is the maturity. Because, like I say, this is, despite obviously she's got people on her team as well, she is basically a musician writing her own songs and performing her own songs from the standpoint of being a musician. She's applying her musical knowledge to writing songs. And, when she goes through all these different changes, and at the time, she was born in 1982, so she'd been 22 when she did this album. And of course, she'd have been writing it before then, so she'd been about 21 years old when she was writing this album. And the ability to capture so many styles from heavy punky songs, and knowing to go for call and answer choruses, to go for catchy shout out one word over and over again choruses, going down to these beautiful sort of build up, sort of theatrical songs like Kinyo Hanabi, which were used on soundtracks and still remain popular as karaoke songs for the big bursting emotional sound, to sort of gentle little nice little ditties in the middle that know how to be sort of nice and balanced, to things like Mosso Chop where it just goes crazy electro, but the fact that she's clearly not left any sound off the table. You can just see that to her, sound is a toy. It's something she wants to play with. It's something she wants to enjoy. And she just... It's like seeing an actor eat up the scenery. It's like seeing a musician who just... You can imagine walking to the studio and just put everything in front of me. I'm going to go crazy. And at the same time, write with an incredible maturity. It's brilliant. Its place in her career is really interesting. It's like I say, a lot of people know that the second album tends to be safe. Now, this is not a huge deviation from the first album. The first album has a lot of similar vibes. So the first album does have that sort of sense of variation. It does have the ballads. It does have some more rocky songs. Nothing quite as heavy as, Superman, Happy Days, and Pom Pom on this, which are definitely heavier than anything on the first album. But it has a similar sort of vibe. So this does feel like it is just a progression of the first album. But it is a progression. And then from this album, in the next one, she goes for more changes, experiments more, and then as her albums go on, there's more and more experimentation. Now, after a certain point, she did start to sort of calm things down. There were I think it was, by the time she got to her fifth album, there were some really sort of bizarre choices on that. But as a general, it was a fairly settled album, not quite as bizarre as a lot of stuff on this. But she hadn't really, up until almost exactly 10 years later in 2014, when she had another album called Love Fantastic, which to me really captured the vibe of this, and that it had like this plethora of mad songs. And that was written over quite a long period of time. She had a hiatus in which she wrote that album over. And, that album for me started to recapture a bit of this. But I think this has... it's amazing to hear a second album that doesn't play it too safe. It's amazing to hear someone so young write with such maturity and such variation. And I think that, to me, this, like I say, it's something that, as a listener, I think anyone could enjoy for the good melodies. Anyone who likes music can enjoy the variation. And certainly, if you are a musician or if you actually work with music, then I think you could just appreciate... Whether you appreciate how great the creation, the various facets of this album are, I'm sure you would. But on top of that, it's the fact that also appreciating that it was made by a 21-year-old. I mean, I don't think that... I always say that you should never take into context the person who made it, because... ultimately their job is to entertain. If someone says, oh, well, they're only a new musician, it's like, well, they're still being paid a lot of money to do the album. So, I wouldn't say that's a factor that should be considered in your enjoyment. But if you already enjoy the album, just bear that in mind. She was like 21 when she wrote most of this and 22 when it came out. It's just, it's a really mature offering. Now, one of the big questions, has it dated well? And this is something that I often ask myself with these kind of albums. So a lot of things about the sound... there's a lot of contemporary sounds that have occurred in the last 16 years, or 17 years now. A lot of, counting the months, a lot of sounds that have occurred in that time that obviously are not really hinted to here. So in a lot of ways, it sounds dated in not having a lot of those things. It maybe sounds dated in the fact that its singles are a mixture of a big ballad. Ballads tend to date better, but also, rocky songs like Happy Days. Like I say, this was from a generation when that sort of rock was really in the charts, and those songs are very much of their time. I think this probably follows the fairly normal standpoint that the more sort of more traditional a song is, the more ballady a song is, the more it tends to date well. It's not always the truth, but it tends to be true. I think this album very much does lean towards that as being a sort of truth. The rocky songs, because of the fact they're produced, like I say, in that sort of very smooth way, which was of the time, they sound a bit more dated, but still, rock has a sort of classic energy, distorted guitars and such like that. I think even if you hear the production as being a bit dated sounding, overall it will still appeal to anyone who likes rock, because it is rock, because it has the quintessential qualities that make a good rock song. So, there are certain aspects that maybe feel the dating. But there's also aspects that don't. There's certain songs, like I say, a lot of the time, especially like King of Hanabi, a lot of those songs really stand the test of time just by sort of having that sort of timeless theatrical quality. So for me, it doesn't feel cutting edge, but it doesn't feel old and dated either. You can listen to it without feeling like you're living in a time warp. You can enjoy it for having a quality that kind of supersedes any of its production shortcomings. You can just frankly enjoying it for being a well-crafted, a varied album. So I would say personally, I would recommend this album to anyone, and I have. It's an album that anyone who's known me for a long time knows that I really enjoy. I had a big poster of the album cover on my bedroom wall for a good few years. That's something to wake up to. It's an album that has always had a special place for me. Yes, I'm perhaps a little bit more biased to it from sentimental value, but going back and really deep diving into it as I have over the last couple of days to really sort of assess it, I couldn't help but just be amazed at how much it does hold up to scrutiny. How little demand there was on her to produce an album of this complexity. If anything, at the time, the demand on her was to produce another catchy Sakurambo single. And you could argue that that's actually where this album has most failed. It's always hard to follow up an ultra catchy, debut single. Well, it wasn't a debut, but, that first song that really breaks you out. yeah, I can see that it could be argued this album is incredibly catchy. It's got really catchy songs, but none of them quite get to that level. And I think it would be fair to say that it never sounds like she's trying to write another Sakuraba. It never sounds like she's trying to write a follow-up, which is brave in itself. It just feels like she's enjoyed making the music. And to me, that's kind of the standout quality of this, is that the album feels like whatever remit Avex might have had, and Avex as a record company would have had demands that they would have given to her, which would have been passed down through like executive producers and such like, staff as a general. It still sounds like an album written just for the sake of creating good music. I think it's thoroughly entertaining. I think if you haven't heard it, like I say, it ages well enough that you can go back to it and enjoy it as a first listen as well. I think that's fair to say. And so, as always, it'd be lovely to know what you guys think. So I'm going to change back to final. Which glasses should I use for final bit? Yes, use the glass I started with. So for the final bit, I'm going to say thank you to you. I'm going to ask you, therefore, to jump into the comments. Tell me what you think. As with all the albums that I'm going to be covering on here, I'm going to try and cover albums that can be listened to on streaming services. Spotify, especially, that's the one that I go to. I know that they're an evil corporation, but given the choices available, Spotify is the best one for me to go for. I know there are regional differences, but I think most of these albums can be heard anywhere. I'm pretty sure that OTSUKA's albums are available internationally, but there are ways to get hold of them. Obviously, there's music videos as well. Do check out the music videos if you want for any of the songs on the album. It's pretty easy to find, or just check out the artist if you want. Like I say, she's an artist who I think she's had a lot of very different, varied and interesting material over a long period of time, but this is as old as it might be. I think this is a great starting point. If you just want to get into OTSUKA as a general and you want to hear a more recent album instead, if you're worried about listening to something that's going to sound a bit dated, I would say therefore maybe skip straight to Love Fantastic, an album that maybe I'll give a review of sometime as well, but that is a bit more contemporary sounding. However, I think this album is the more famous, and I think it stands as being worth a mention just for being kind of a footnote in Japanese music history, as well as anything else. Maybe not the most famous album, but certainly an album that a lot of people, anyone around at the time, will recognise for more than just the cover, hopefully. But yeah, great stuff. I really hope you enjoy it. Like I say, if you haven't heard it, then please check it out. But if you have heard it, whether you be a new listener or someone who heard it a long time ago, get in the comments, tell me what you think. This channel is all about discussion. Like I said, I've worked with music my entire adult life, but these are just my opinions. Just because I can articulate them doesn't mean they're worth any more than yours. So please try and articulate your opinions to me as well. I'd love to know if you're a long-time fan, if you've got a favourite album, an album you prefer more than this. I wouldn't actually say this is my favourite album, but it's definitely one that is worth noting. If you've got a favourite song from the album, opinions on anything album, let me know. As always, liking and subscribing is greatly appreciated because we're a non-monetized channel and it's our Patreon supporters. Big thank you to you who keep this whole ship afloat. So, mucho gracias. A big thank you as well to anyone who follows any of the social medias linked in the description below. We're trying to keep them alive. I have to maintain a lot of it myself. The other guys on the channel help as well. But so apologies if there's any gaps in the posts of any of them. But, you know, much appreciated for following those. I'll try and get as much content out on all the various social medias as well. And just a big thank you if you've made it through to the end of this video and listened to all this waffle. So anyway, for now, from Japan, again, big thank you to you. Until I hopefully see you very soon for the next one of these. For now, ciao, ciao.